This is the story of the Maid, rejected the black millionaire's proposal. Years later, she knocked on his door as it truly unfolded. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, each drop catching the amber glow of the city lights 40 stories below. Marcus Washington stood motionless in his tailored charcoal suit, watching the storm rage outside while a different tempest churned within his chest. The leather portfolio in his hands contained documents that could change everything, but his mind kept drifting to a face he hadn't seen in 7 years. A face that had haunted every success, every triumph, every lonely night in this glass tower he'd built around himself. The intercom buzzed, sharp and insistent. "Mr. Washington, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Eleanor Morales." The portfolio slipped from his fingers, papers scattering across the marble floor like fallen leaves. Elena. After all these years, after the silence that had stretched between them like an ocean, she was here. If you've ever wondered whether some stories are worth the wait, stay with me, because this one will change how you see second chances forever. Marcus pressed the intercom button with a trembling finger. Send her up. 7 years ago, Elena Morales had been the invisible woman who cleaned his offices after midnight, moving through the shadows of his empire like a ghost. She arrived each evening when the last executive had gone home, when the marble halls echoed with nothing but the whisper of her footsteps and the soft swish of her mop across the floors. Marcus had noticed her immediately, not because she was beautiful, though she was, with her dark hair always pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of coffee at dawn. He noticed her because she was the only person in his world who looked at him and saw just a man. Back then, Marcus was 28 and already worth $50 million. His tech company, Nexus Solutions, had revolutionized data security for Fortune 500 companies. He owned 3 homes, drove cars that cost more than most people's houses, and had his pick of socialites and models who saw dollar signs when they looked into his eyes. But Eleanor, she would nod politely when their paths crossed in the empty hallways, offer a quiet, "Good evening, Mr. Washington," and continue with her work as if he were just another piece of furniture to dust around. It started with small conversations. Marcus began staying late, claiming he needed to review reports, but really he was waiting for those brief moments when Elena would emerge from cleaning his office. He learned that she was 25, that she sent most of her paycheck to her mother in Guatemala, that she was studying English at night school between her 3 cleaning jobs. He discovered that she had a laugh like silver bells, and that she read poetry during her breaks, dog-eared paperbacks she kept in her cleaning cart. "Why do you work so hard?" he asked her one December night, when snow was falling outside and the office felt like a sanctuary suspended above the world. Eleanor paused in her dusting, looking at him with those impossibly honest eyes. "Because dreams don't clean themselves, Mr. Washington. They require sacrifice." That was when Marcus knew he was falling in love with her. The courtship was unconventional. Marcus couldn't take Elena to the places he usually went, couldn't parade her through the social circles that would dissect her background and judge her worth by her bank account. Instead, he discovered the city through her eyes. They met at small cafes in neighborhoods he'd never visited, walked through parks where children played and elderly couples fed pigeons. Elena showed him a world where wealth was measured in laughter, where success meant having enough to share with those you loved. For 6 months, they existed in this secret bubble. Marcus would finish his meetings, dismiss his driver, and take the subway to meet Elena after her classes. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing. She told him about her father, who had died building houses for rich families while living in a shack himself. He told her about the loneliness of success, how every relationship felt like a transaction, how he'd forgotten what it meant to be seen rather than simply wanted. "You're different when you're with me," Elena observed one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the river. "More real. You make me remember who I was before all this," Marcus replied, gesturing vaguely toward the skyline where his building stood like a monument to his ambition. but their worlds were about to collide in the most devastating way possible. The night Marcus decided to propose, he had everything planned. He'd bought a ring that cost more than Elena made in 5 years, a simple solitaire that caught light like a captured star. He'd reserved the rooftop garden of the city's most exclusive restaurant, had arranged for a string quartet, for roses flown in from Ecuador because Elena had once mentioned missing the flowers of her homeland. But when he called Elena to ask her to meet him, her voice was strange, distant. "I can't see you anymore, Marcus." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean, Elena? I need to tell you something important. I love you. I want to marry you." The silence stretched so long he thought the call had dropped. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I know who you really are now." That afternoon, Elena had been called into the office of Pinnacle Cleaning Services, the company that employed her. Mrs. Richardson, the owner, was a sharp-faced woman who had built her business by knowing exactly where every skeleton was buried in the corporate world. "Sit down, Elena," Mrs. Richardson had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We need to talk about your little romance with Marcus Washington." Elena's blood had turned to ice. She'd been so careful, so discreet, but Mrs. Richardson had photos, taken by a private investigator Marcus's business partner had hired. Photos of Elena and Marcus holding hands, laughing together, sharing quiet moments that were supposed to be theirs alone. "You see, dear," Mrs. Richardson continued, "Mr. Washington's company is one of our biggest clients, and Mr. Washington's business partner, James Crawford, is very concerned about this situation. He's worried that you might be after Mr. Washington's money, that you might cause problems for the company." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. "It's not like that." "Of course it isn't," Mrs. Richardson said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "But appearances matter in business. Mr. Crawford has made it very clear that if this relationship continues, Pinnacle Cleaning will lose the Nexus Solutions contract. That's 40% of our revenue, Elena. It would mean laying off 30 people, 30 families who depend on these jobs." The trap was perfect in its cruelty. Elena could continue seeing Marcus and destroy the livelihoods of 30 families, or she could sacrifice her own happiness to protect them. Mrs. Richardson sweetened the poison by offering Elena a promotion, a supervisor position with better pay, if she ended things cleanly. "And Elena," Mrs. Richardson added as she stood to leave, "Mr. Crawford was very specific. If you tell Mr. Washington about this conversation, the contract ends immediately. He'll know it was you who caused those families to lose their jobs." So when Marcus called that night, his voice full of love and hope, Elena felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She couldn't tell him the truth without destroying innocent lives. She couldn't accept his proposal, knowing it was built on a foundation of threats and manipulation. "I can't marry you," she whispered into the phone. "We're from different worlds, Marcus. I was foolish to think it could work. Elena, please, let me see you. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. I'm sorry, but this is goodbye." She hung up and cried until she had no tears left. Marcus tried everything to reach her. He called, he went to her apartment, he even showed up at the cleaning company. But Elena had vanished from his life as completely as if she'd never existed. Mrs. Richardson informed him that Elena had requested a transfer to a different route, that she no longer worked in his building. When he pressed for her new contact information, he was told it was confidential. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena hadn't just lost him that night. The stress and heartbreak had triggered a miscarriage of the child she'd just discovered she was carrying, a secret she'd planned to share with him, along with her answer to his proposal. She'd been 3 weeks pregnant with their baby when she'd been forced to choose between love and the survival of 30 families. The years that followed were a study in parallel pain. Marcus threw himself into his work with a vengeance that bordered on obsession. Nexus Solutions expanded globally, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country, but success tasted like ashes in his mouth. He dated occasionally, always women from his social circle, always relationships that felt like elaborate performances. He never proposed to anyone again. Elena, meanwhile, used her promotion to put herself through business school. She worked days as a cleaning supervisor and attended classes at night, driven by a determination that was born from loss. She started a small non-profit organization that provided job training and placement services for immigrant women, funding it with every spare dollar she earned. She never married, never even dated seriously. How could she, when her heart remained locked in a glass tower 40 stories above the city? Neither of them knew that James Crawford, Marcus's business partner, had been systematically embezzling from Nexus Solutions for years. The threat to Elena had been his way of removing what he saw as a distraction that might lead Marcus to discover the missing funds. Crawford had been skimming money through fake vendor contracts, using his position as CFO to hide his theft behind layers of legitimate transactions. But Crawford's greed finally caught up with him. A routine audit triggered by new banking regulations uncovered discrepancies that led to a full investigation. When the FBI arrested Crawford, they found evidence of not just embezzlement, but also the private investigator's reports and recorded conversations with Mrs. Richardson. The truth about Elena's forced choice came to light in the most devastating way possible. Marcus sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the evidence spread across the mahogany table. Photos of Elena crying in her car after their last phone call, transcripts of Crawford's instructions to the private investigator, bank records showing payments to Mrs. Richardson for her cooperation in the scheme. "She never wanted my money," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "She was protecting people." His lawyer, an elderly man who had known Marcus since he was a struggling entrepreneur, leaned forward with gentle eyes. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" That was 3 months ago. Since then, Marcus had been trying to find Elena, but she seemed to have disappeared again. Her old apartment was occupied by strangers. The cleaning company had no forwarding address. Even private investigators came up empty. It was as if Elena Morales had become a ghost, haunting only his memories and regrets, until tonight. The elevator chimed softly, and Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as the doors slid open. Elena stepped into his penthouse, and 7 years collapsed into nothing. She was older now, 32 to his 35, and success had changed her just as it had changed him. Her dark hair was shorter, styled in a way that spoke of confidence and achievement. She wore a simple black dress that was elegant without being expensive, and her eyes held a strength that hadn't been there before. But underneath all the changes, she was still Elena. Still the woman who had made him feel human in a world of transactions. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of all the years between them. "Eleanor." Her name felt foreign and familiar on his tongue, like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. You look beautiful." A sad smile crossed her face. You look tired." They stood there in the vast space of his living room, two people who had once shared everything now separated by an ocean of unspoken words. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and the city lights blurred into abstract paintings of longing. "I know about Crawford," Elena said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know about Mrs. Richardson, about the threats, about everything." Marcus felt his knees go weak. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known—" "You would have done exactly what I did," she interrupted. "You would have protected those families, even if it cost you everything. That's who you are, Marcus. That's why I fell in love with you." The past tense hit him like a physical blow. "And now?" Elena walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the cool glass. "Now I'm here because I need your help." Marcus moved closer, careful not to invade her space, but desperate to bridge the distance between them. "Anything, whatever you need. My non-profit is in trouble," Elena said, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked window. We've been helping women escape domestic violence, providing them with job training and safe housing, but our funding has dried up and we're about to lose everything. 200 women and their children will be back on the streets if I can't find a way to save the program." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Once again, Eleanor was sacrificing her own desires to protect others. Once again, she was coming to Marcus not for herself, but for people who had no other advocate. "How much do you need?" Marcus asked. $2 million, Elena said, turning to face him. "I know it's a lot, but—" "Done." Elena blinked, startled by the immediacy of his response. "Marcus, you don't understand. This isn't a loan. The program might never be profitable. You might never see that money again. I don't care about the money, Elena. I never have." Marcus took a step closer, his voice raw with emotion. "Do you know what I've done with my life since you left? I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I haven't lived a single day. I've been existing in this tower, building walls higher and higher, trying to forget the only person who ever made me feel alive." Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Marcus, I know I don't deserve a second chance," he continued, his voice breaking. "I know that 7 years is a long time, and you've built a life without me. But Elena, I need you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Not a single day that I haven't wondered what would have happened if I'd been stronger, if I'd fought harder for us." Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were full of a pain that matched his own. "You want to know what would have happened? I'll tell you. I was pregnant, Marcus. When Mrs. Richardson forced me to choose between you and those families, I was carrying our child." The world tilted on its axis. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the full weight of Elena's sacrifice hit him. "Elena, no. I lost the baby 3 days after I ended things with you," she whispered. "The stress, the heartbreak. My body couldn't handle it. I lost our child, and I lost you, and I had to pretend it was all my choice." Marcus sank into a chair, his hands covering his face as sobs racked his body. All these years, he'd thought Eleanor had simply decided he wasn't worth the complications. He'd never imagined the true cost of Crawford's manipulation, the depth of Elena's sacrifice. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "Elena, I'm so sorry." Elena knelt beside his chair, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "It wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault, except the people who used our love as a weapon against us." They sat in the silence of shared grief, mourning not just for the child they'd lost, but for the 7 years that had been stolen from them. Outside, the storm was beginning to calm, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Marcus asked, when he could finally speak again. "When the truth came out about Crawford, why didn't you come to me then?" Elena stood and walked back to the windows, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that too much time had passed, that too much damage had been done. Afraid that you'd moved on and found someone who could give you the life you deserved." "There's never been anyone else," Marcus said quietly. "Not really. How could there be, when you took my heart with you when you left?" Elena turned, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked at this man she'd never stopped loving, this man who had been as much a victim of Crawford's greed as she had been. "I've missed you," she whispered. "God, Marcus, I've missed you so much." Marcus stood and crossed to her, his hands gentle as he cupped her face. "Then stay, not just for tonight, not just until your program is funded. Stay and let me love you the way I should have 7 years ago. Let me fight for us the way I was too blind to fight before." "It won't be easy," Elena said, leaning into his touch. "We're different people now. We've both been hurt, both built walls to protect ourselves." "Then we'll tear them down together," Marcus replied. "Brick by brick, wall by wall, until there's nothing between us but truth." Elena searched his eyes, looking for the boy she'd fallen in love with in the man he'd become. She found him there, buried beneath years of success and loneliness, but still present, still waiting for her. "What about your world?" she asked. The society pages, the board meetings, the people who will never accept a cleaning lady as your equal." Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 7 years, it reached his eyes. "Let them talk. I've spent too many years caring what other people think, letting their expectations dictate my choices. I won't make that mistake again." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Besides, you're not a cleaning lady anymore. You're Elena Morales, the woman who built a non-profit from nothing, who saved hundreds of lives, who's stronger and braver than anyone I know. You're the woman I love, and I don't care who knows it." Eleanor felt the last of her walls crumble as Marcus's lips found hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might disappear. But then 7 years of longing took over, and they held each other with the desperation of people who had been drowning and finally found air. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her head against Marcus's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we start over," Marcus said, his arms tightening around her. "We take it slow, we rebuild trust, we learn who we are together in this new world we're going to create. And the non-profit gets its funding, and I get to watch the woman I love change the world, one life at a time. It's the best investment I'll ever make." Eleanor pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining with tears and hope in equal measure. "You really think we can make this work, after everything that's happened?" Marcus tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch infinitely gentle. "I think we're living proof that some love stories are worth waiting for. We've both been tested by fire, Elena. We've both survived the worst that life could throw at us. If we can survive 7 years apart, we can survive anything together." As if in response to his words, the storm outside finally broke. The clouds parted to reveal the first stars of the evening, their light reflecting off the wet streets below like scattered diamonds. The city spread out beneath them, full of possibility and promise. "Look," Elena said, pointing to the sky. "The storm is over." Marcus followed her gaze, then looked back at her face, illuminated by starlight and hope. "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning, but this time we'll weather it together." They stood there in the aftermath of revelation and reunion, two souls who had found their way back to each other against impossible odds. Outside, the city hummed with life, with stories of love and loss, triumph and tragedy. But inside the glass tower that had once been Marcus's prison, a new story was beginning, a story of second chances and hard-won wisdom, of love that had been tested by time and emerged stronger for the trial. Elena's non-profit would not only survive, but thrive, expanding to help thousands of women across the country. Marcus would step back from the day-to-day operations of his company, focusing instead on philanthropic work that gave his wealth meaning beyond mere accumulation. Together, they would build a foundation that addressed the very inequalities that had once threatened to tear them apart. But all of that was still to come. For now, there was only this moment, this quiet miracle of two hearts finding their way home to each other. The rain had stopped, the stars were shining, and love had proven once again that it was stronger than fear, more powerful than greed, more enduring than time itself. In a world that often seems determined to keep people apart, sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing to love. Elena and Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, but they had learned it completely. Their story was far from over, but it was no longer a tragedy. It was a testament to the truth that some bonds cannot be broken, no matter how many forces conspire against them. If this story of love surviving against impossible odds has touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between love and duty? What would you have done in Elena's position? Share this story with someone who believes in second chances, because sometimes we all need to be reminded that it's never too late for love to find its way home.